Weigh in with Rutherford at 1-800-563-7770. Rutherford on QR77.
Well, you know, one of the hottest, most contentious issues the Harper government's had to deal with, as it was in minority and now majority, was the issue of the long gun registry, gun control. And you've heard a lot of the bleating from Central Canadians, especially after incidents of some gun violence, that gun control must be made more strict. More gun control, more gun control. We've got to stop homicide, stop violence. More gun control. Wendy Sukier, for example, you know, the maven of gun control advocates in Central Canada, continues to bark away at the fact that more gun control would lead to fewer homicides in Canada. Really? As the federal government is on the verge of eliminating the long gun registry, some empirical data has been studied, and if you care about these kinds of things, peer-reviewed by my guest, Dr. Caillin Langmann, resident physician, Division of Emergency Medicine at McMaster University. Doctor, thanks for joining us.
Welcome. It's my pleasure to be on with you today.
Hey, first of all, why are you, as a doc, involved in looking at the comparison between gun control and homicide?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm an emergency physician, and I'm probably actually one of the few physicians in Canada to actually deal with homicide and injury caused by firearms on a fairly regular basis, as I work in a large city in Canada. And I started to get interested in it when our Association of Emergency Physicians had published a position statement regarding the apparent benefits of some of the legislation. And that seems strange to me because most of the people that seem to be involved that we would see in the emergency department were people involved in drugs and other criminality, and it didn't seem to be the people that, were target shooting or hunting or what have you.
So the actual victims of firearm violence were not those that might be affected by things like the long gun registry.
It seemed that way to me. So I took all the statistics going back to 1974, applied three types of statistical analysis that is available for this type of epidemiological research to it, to see if there was any impact effects from any of the legislation, either in 1977, 1991, and 1995, as well as looked at gradual effects of those legislations. As I'm sure many of your listeners are aware, some of the things such as the PAL and the long gun registry itself were phased in over a period of time, so you can't just look at one time point and say there's impact effect there.
Right. So over the long-term analysis of these statistics, we know that the homicide rate, some violent crime rates are going down, some are going up, but gun-related are going down, or trending down. And people would claim, see, gun control works. You're saying not so.
Well, with those kinds of things, you have to be very careful. I mean, you can easily put up a graph after 1995 showing a trend decrease, but if you don't look at the trend before 1995, before the legislation was enacted, you can fool yourself into thinking that there's a significant decrease. It's actually kind of nice to see the National Post a couple days ago ran an actual graph of firearms homicide in Canada, and you can see that there is this overall declining trend over the years that we found in our study to be associated with just increasing age, both decreasing size of the 15 to 24-year-old population, as well as the increasing average age of the population over time. That was statistically associated with a decline in firearms and overall homicide, in fact. And that's not entirely unexpected. It's been demonstrated in other research that just as people get older, they're less involved in these types of activities.
So going back then, you went back to the 70s?
We went back to 1974 because prior to 1974, there's this increase in firearms homicide. I mean, there's no associated legislation at that point in time. And then in 1974, there's this sudden drop. And it just keeps dropping up till now when it started to even off at this 1991, right after the C-17 was introduced, that showed handgun homicide actually statistically increasing.
Well, and as you said, you see, well, in your emergency medicine practice, but I'm sure a lot of docs will tell you this. I mean, the people that are getting shot, that are coming in with gunshot wounds, they're in the criminal element, right?
Well, first of all, I don't think many physicians can comment on it because not many physicians are seeing people shot. I mean, it's just not something that happens both in Canada or the United States that physicians are typically involved in, right? You have to be in a center where there is this kind of activity going on, and for the most part, that's what I'm seeing. I mean, I don't have any evidence to suggest that other than from just past experience to suggest that that's a relationship. There is other evidence published in the literature showing that there's definitely a relationship between the two. But it does seem to be the trend. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of opinions on this that don't actually see these things.
So basically, going back to 74, you're suggesting that there really is no association between some legislated firearms prohibitions or registries or training or anything to correspond with the declining homicide rate.
No, there does not seem to be an association statistically that we could find a beneficial association at all. I mean, I invite everyone to have a look at the graph in the National Post and see it for themselves. See if they can see a significant point where there's been a change. Some people have come out with claims that if it wasn't for C-68 in 1995, that we would have an extra 200 or double the homicide rate in Canada. Well, we never had that rate before 1995. I don't see how we would get to that rate.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Dr. Standby, Dr. Caillin Langmann, we're talking about his work comparing, gun homicides and the legislation, and there is no correlation. We're topping, $2 billion in the long gun registry already? Money wasted. Because it didn't have any effect back after this. We're talking about a comparison of data, statistics, and an overlay from the 70s to today, and my guest has done the work and said there is no connection, there's no correlation between a declining homicide rate and all this legislation, whether it's the long gun registry, criminal records checks, mandatory safety training, waiting periods. Dr. Caillin Langmann is with me. You're saying even you couldn't justify training as valuable or just statistically important?
Well, part of the problem with statistics in general is that, and the way that these legislations are introduced, is that it's really difficult to study one particular intervention. I mean, you're studying a package, right? And the problem with that is that one intervention might make things worse, one intervention might make things better and cancel itself out. So I think that, and this has been studied in large meta-analysis, both by the National Academy of Sciences, and they've shown that there's no proven beneficial effect from any type of firearm legislation. That the evidence is equivocal and more research is needed. I mean, personally, do I think that we should be allowing criminals to purchase firearms? No. Part of the problem with statistics in this regard also is that there's just a low number of firearms homicides in Canada anyway. So the numbers can be skewed quite quickly if there's a sudden rash of homicide, or if things die down for some reason, which can make it seem like there might be a difference. So, does training have a benefit? It's hard to say. I mean, the people that are using firearms, I don't think any training is going to convince them not to go and shoot somebody. It might help them stop an accidental, shooting, but we don't see many of those.
I see your point. There are others who have looked at this and said you did not cover suicide in your statistical analysis. Did you? And if you didn't, does that matter?
Well, the way journals work is that you're only allowed a certain amount of space. So this publication itself takes up that amount of space that I'm allocated. I want to go and look at suicide, which I think is an interesting thing to look at itself. It would require another study. So it wasn't left out for any other reason than I'm simply looking at homicide with the study.
And really, if we're looking at, I guess the purists would suggest that there be no firearms of any kind, right? I mean, there just wouldn't be any firearms because then you wouldn't have access to them, and you might not use them as a means of suicide. I don't know, Doc. I mean, if somebody's going to commit suicide, I think they're going to commit suicide.
That's been my experience. So the argument is there what's known as a substitution effect. If you take away someone's method of committing suicide, if they're really serious, they'll substitute another method. The reason that people think that firearms are a particular danger in suicide is that it's a rapid method that's very effective that simply requires not much effort to go and do. And if someone's feeling particularly unstable at a certain point in time, they may just go and do that. But the other substitution method that's widely used in Canada is hanging, and that rope is very easy to obtain, and we do see those suicides frequently. And that's my main frustration, actually, as a physician, is that we have, when I hear numbers like what you said, that there's been $2 billion under the general report, that has been lost in this type of thing. And I think about the problem, and this is what's really frustrated me, is that when I want to refer to someone who is unstable to a psychiatrist who, I can't actively, put them in the hospital at that point in time because they're not that unstable, but they do need help. They're asking for help.
Right.
There is no psychiatrist available for up to, at times, 6 months.
Yep.
And I can only, if we just put that $2 billion towards things that have been proven to have significant benefits, such as psychiatry, such as women's shelters, such as training for the police in terms of domestic dispute and awareness for domestic dispute and violence, I think it would be better spent.
Yeah, I mean, I think in our awareness of the deficiencies of mental health spending in all the provinces and everywhere, Doc, I think is becoming more and more prevalent these days. We're talking more about it than ever, so maybe that'll translate into more mental health facilities for everybody. Maybe it will. Let's hope so. But you're right about that. That would be a way to prevent or head off many suicides, not just using guns in suicide. And handguns, there has been a handgun registry in this country since the 30s.
Yep.
And so what? It hasn't done anything.
I can't say anything based on my research if it has or has not done anything. I mean, other scientists have looked at this and have found that the registry for firearms doesn't seem to have a beneficial effect in regards to homicide.
Well, we're back to the old question. Bad guys don't register their guns.
Well,
I mean, it's the way it is.
That does seem to be what the literature suggests, is that they obtain them from each other, people that they know, and there's an underground market for these things. They never do think about going to a store and buying one legitimately.
No, exactly. Stand by just a sec, if you could, please, Dr. Caillin Langmann, back after this.
Look to your right as far as you can, and you'll see Rutherford, where Alberta meets to discuss the issues of the day. Call 974-TALK, 974-8255. Rutherford on QR77.
My guest has taken an interesting perspective on analyzing homicide rates, overlaying the rates with a declining rate with all the legislation that is before us now, and he's come up with the conclusion that, in fact, there is no association. And it's an interesting point you make, Dr. Langmann, about the population. Basically, we're seeing the boomers getting older. You're saying richer, older population, and there's less inequity. Is that part of your sort of analysis here of society?
Well, it seems to be that there's an association between both age and unemployment, and
less generational conflict, less socio-economic conflict, so we're a little happier. It's the peaceful kingdom, Doc.
Well, it does seem to be that those things are going down, but like I did say earlier, for handgun homicide, it doesn't seem to be.
Yeah. Dr. Langmann, listen, I appreciate your time very much. Thanks for the work.
No problem.
Thanks for being here. Dr. Caillin Langmann, resident physician, Division of Emergency Medicine, McMaster. You heard the evidence. Back after this.